The young man upstairs in the Monroe house wasn't refusing to walk. He was hiding the fact that he could feel his legs coming back, because the day sensation returned would be the day his father would stop sitting in the chair beside his bed. 15 trained caregivers had missed it over the past several months. It took a poor woman from Memphis to catch what nobody else saw, and by the time she did, a man in a good suit was already inside that house, making plans to put Sullivan Monroe somewhere they could forget him. Geneva Hughes had buried more strangers than she could count. Not one of their families ever came to the funerals. That was the work nobody else wanted, sitting with the ones the world had already finished with, holding a hand that no relative would drive across town to hold. So, when the agency called her about a job 15 other people had already walked out of, she didn't ask why they quit. She asked how much it paid and whether they took somebody without a nursing certificate. The bank had given her until the end of the month to find $4,000 or hand over the only house her grandson had ever known. The woman on the phone went silent a second too long. "Mrs. Hughes, I'll be honest with you, because you'll find out anyway. We've sent 15 people to that house over the past several months. Trained people. 2 of them lasted a single afternoon. And it isn't that the young man up there is hard to care for, Mrs. Hughes. It's that he doesn't want to be cared for. He runs them out on purpose, watches each one, figures out the thing that wears her down, and uses it. By the 5th one, he had it down to a method. The family doesn't want to hear that, and his father pays whatever it takes to pretend that isn't what's happening." Geneva looked across her kitchen at the stack of envelopes she'd stopped opening, red prints showing through the little windows. Graham's school shoes sat by the door, solace peeling, and the boy was 18 and too proud to mention it. "What's wrong with his legs?" she asked. Guillain-Barré syndrome, where the body turns on its own nerves. He went from running his father's company to not being able to lift a fork. He's 22, 4 years older than Graham. Geneva shut her eyes and saw a young man she'd never met lying in a bed in a house she'd never seen, deciding he was already dead. She knew that decision. She'd made it herself when she was barely more than a girl, the year her own mother sat her down and informed her she'd thrown her whole life in a ditch. "When do they want me?" The Monroe house did not look like a place where anyone lived. It looked like a place where things were kept. Marble that gave nothing back under her shoes. A staircase wide enough to drive a truck up. A hush so thick Geneva could hear her own pulse. A man in a gray suit met her at the door, took in her cardigan and her canvas bag, and she watched him pencil her in to be gone by Friday. He didn't offer a hand. "You're the new one. I'm Geneva. Mr. Monroe will see you in the study. The patient is upstairs. We don't go up without reason. And Mrs. Hughes, when Mr. Porter Monroe phones the house, you walk the phone to Mr. Monroe immediately. Mr. Porter is the family's other Monroe. He sits on the board, and he has been attentive to what your predecessors had to report. The patient, not Sullivan, not the boy. A thing that happened in a room they avoided. Lincoln Monroe rose when she came in, which surprised her, and shook her hand, which surprised her more. He was tall and tailored and worn down past anything money could fix. He spoke how men like him speak, clipped, clean sentences with no soft edges, laying out the rules like terms in a contract. "My son requires structured care. Meals at 8, noon, and 6. The therapist comes Tuesdays and Thursdays. You'll keep to the schedule. You will not discuss his condition with him beyond what's necessary. You will not discuss me, and you will not, under any circumstances, raise the subject of recovery, because there is no recovery, and false hope is a cruelty. For 1 second, the contract voice cracked open. The last woman promised him he'd walk by Christmas. He didn't speak for 2 weeks after she left. Geneva kept her eyes on him. What do you want me to do with him? Then, Lincoln looked at her as though the question had no answer anyone had ever asked him to find. Keep him comfortable. Keep him clean. Keep him alive. That's keeping a body. Mr. Monroe, you got a man up there or a body. The hush after that was the loudest thing in the house. Lincoln Monroe, who owned half the skyline outside his window, had nothing to put in the gap. He told her the study door would always be closed, and Geneva understood him to mean every door in that house had been closed for a long time. She found Sullivan Monroe in a room at the end of the hall with the curtains pulled against a perfectly good afternoon. He turned himself toward the wall. He didn't look over when the door opened. On her way through the room, she clocked the chair beside the bed. The cushion was perfect, untouched, the look of furniture in a house where nobody ever lowered themselves down to sit. 15 caregivers had walked into this room and stayed standing. I'm not eating. His voice came out sharp enough to draw blood. Whatever they sent you up here to make me do, save your back. The sharpness shocked her. She braced for something thin, something broken. This was a blade cold and clear and aimed and underneath it a young man who still had every weapon he was born with and had turned them all on himself. Geneva crossed to the window and hauled the curtains open so hard the rings shrieked on the rod. Light fell across the bed and he flinched like it scalded him. What are you doing? Letting some son into a tomb. Lord, it smells like surrender in here. She moved through the room as though it belonged to her, gathering the untouched trays, the medicine cups, the small daily wreckage of a person who'd stopped trying. 15 people, they tell me, downstairs. You ran 15 grown professionals clean out of this house. You must be exhausting to keep up with. That turned his head for the first time. He really looked at her, a boy already braced to be left, already counting down to it. You'll be 16. We'll see about that. She said, a fresh glass of water within his reach. The others had made him beg for it. I had a daughter who used to look at me exactly like that, like she was daring me to walk out the door. You know what that look taught me? He didn't ask, but he didn't turn back to the wall either. The wall was usually his first weapon. He'd never lost inside the first 10 minutes before. It only comes out of people scared half to death that the door is about to open. She picked up her bag. I'll be back at 6. You don't have to eat a bite, but I'm bringing real food. Not that hospital paste, and I cooked it with my own 2 hands. So, if you throw it out, you're insulting my kitchen, and I take that personal. She had her hand on the door when his voice came again, lower. The blade lay down for a second. They always say they'll stay. She turned. He'd already flinched ahead to the answer. Geneva shook her head. I'm not going to tell you I'll stay. You heard that 15 times, and it was a lie 15 times. I'm just going to come back at 6, and then tomorrow we'll see about tomorrow. She came back at 6, and she came back the next day, and the day after that. She stopped announcing it. What she didn't tell Sullivan, or anyone in that marble house, was what those first weeks cost her on the other end. She drove an hour each way. She came home past 9 to a grandson who'd already fed himself cereal for supper and pretended he wasn't waiting up. Graham at the kitchen counter with a textbook he couldn't afford the next semester of, looking up to ask how the rich boy was. She'd tell him a little. He'd nod and not say the thing they both heard. Underneath it, that his grandmother was pouring herself into a stranger's son because the well she dug for her own daughter had gone dry years. Ago. One night Graham put it to her plain. He shut the book and looked up at her. You couldn't fix Mom, so now you're trying to fix him. It landed hard because it was half true, and Geneva had learned long ago that the half-true things are the ones that cut. She lowered herself onto the stool beside him. Maybe, she allowed, but your mom is still alive, baby. And so is that boy. I gave up on too many people too early once. I'm not in the business of giving up early anymore. Not on her, not on him, not on you. She tapped the textbook. Wolf, the question landed like a slap. She'd meant it too. Many days she'd watched him flinch whenever the gray-suited man mentioned a phone call, whenever a car came up the long drive, and she'd put the pieces together. Somewhere back in this boy's history sat a woman who'd left. Sullivan's jaw tightened. She doesn't live here. I didn't ask where she lives. I asked what happened. He stared at the ceiling a long while, and Geneva let the silence stand because this silence wasn't the surrender kind. This was a man weighing whether to hand over something he'd never handed to a living soul. She left when I was 14. His jaw worked. My father gave her a number she liked better than us. She lives in Scottsdale now. She sent a card when this happened. He tipped his chin at his own useless legs. It had a golf course on the front of it. She wrote, "Thinking of you. Stay strong." His mouth twisted around the words "stay strong" like he'd pulled a muscle raking leaves. A laugh tore out of him ugly and short. Geneva lowered herself into the chair beside his bed, the one the others had warned her never to use, claiming it agitated him. He didn't get agitated. He turned his head and stared at her sitting there as though no one had occupied that chair in years. Geneva kept her eyes on him, gentling her voice down to the register she saved for the worst nights. My daughter Laurel is in a place over in Tennessee, a hospital, the polite kind where they keep people who can't keep themselves. 4 years now. Her boy Graham, my grandson, he was 14 too, when it got bad enough that I had to take him in. Same age you were. She folded her hands in her lap. So, when you tell me your mama walked out on you at 14, I won't insult you and say I understand, because I don't. But I've got a boy at home who knows exactly what your face is doing this minute. The face of a 14-year-old who makes the day the person who's supposed to stay decides they've got somewhere better to be. Sullivan didn't answer, but his hand, the one that could barely close, slid an inch across the blanket toward the chair where she sat. He didn't reach her. He didn't try. It was an inch and nothing more. Geneva had spent a lifetime reading the language of people who couldn't say things out loud, and she knew an inch when one was given to her. In the weeks that followed, things she wasn't supposed to catch began catching her eye. A toe twitched under the blanket while she straightened his pillow, his thumb sliding to scratch a hip itch when he thought she'd already left the room. Once his whole foot jerked sideways when she dropped a spoon, startled alive, no longer playing dead. Geneva didn't speak a word about any of it. She'd learned across a lifetime of this work that certain people only heal when there's certain nobody is watching. So she watched, and she let him hide what he was hiding. She caught something else in those weeks too. Passing the foot of the stairs one evening, she heard the gray-suited man on the phone. His voice dropped low the moment he saw her shadow on the marble. "No, Mr. Porter, she hasn't quit yet." He listened to whatever came back down the line, his eyes cutting toward Geneva. "I'll let you know the day she does." He hung up and gave her a thin look that told her she wasn't the only one keeping count of her days in that house, and that somebody downtown was waiting on a number to hit 0. Until the day the therapist pulled her out into the hall. Reese was a brisk young woman in her late 20s, the kind who didn't waste motion. She had something close to fright on her face when she got Geneva outside the door. I need you to watch something, and then I need you to swear I'm not imagining it. Back in the room, Reese ran Sullivan through the same routine he'd been refusing for months, and this time he let her. She pressed a thumb hard into the arch of his foot. Tell me the second you feel any pressure. Sullivan's eyes came open. Now, she shifted the thumb. Now lower. Reese looked up and her eyes had gone wet. Not long ago he couldn't feel either foot at all. Mrs. Hughes, the nerves are reaching again. It's slow and it's not guaranteed, and I would never put a promise on it. But his body is trying to come back. The floor seemed to tip under Geneva's feet, not from the news, from the look that had taken over Sullivan's face. Because Sullivan had caught every word, and the boy was terrified. She sat in the chair that night and waited him out, patient as she'd learned to be with the dying who had one last true thing to get out. At last it came, his eyes fixed on the ceiling so he wouldn't have to aim them at her. Don't tell my father. Why on God's earth not? Because the minute he believes I'm coming back, I stopped being his sick son and turned back into his project. The heir, the next Monroe. He'll have a tutor in this room by Monday and a man from the company in here by Tuesday. And the whole machine starts up again, the grooming, the expectations. Prove your worth, the name. Prove it again. His voice shook loose at the edges. This is the first stretch of my whole life he sat in a room with me without wanting something from me. He comes to the door now. He never came to the door before. I got my father back the same day I lost my legs. You see it. If I stand up off this bed, I lose him all over again. And there it was. The thing 15 trained caregivers had never once found, because they'd followed the rules: clinical distance, fixed schedule, no personal talk. Rules built to keep this exact truth buried at the bottom of the house. Geneva had broken every single one of them, and so she became the only person in all that time who understood that Sullivan Monroe wasn't refusing to recover. He was hiding the recovery to hold onto the one scrap of love he'd starved for since he was a boy. Geneva leaned in and took his hand, the whole hand, not the polite fingers, and held it. Baby, I'm going to tell you a thing, and I need you to hear it from a woman who has tried it the wrong way already. You cannot make somebody love you by shrinking yourself small. I did it. I folded myself down to nothing trying to make my own mama proud. And you want to know what it earned me? Not one thing. She died disappointed in me with her last breath. The only medicine that ever worked was standing up anyhow, pouring my love into people who could actually pour it back. She tightened her grip. Your daddy is broken, same as you. But you cannot stay paralyzed to keep a broken man parked at your bedside. That isn't love, baby. That's to drowning people agreeing to hold each other under. He cried then. The first time since she'd known him. Big, ugly, freight train sobs, the kind that had been dammed up for months behind a wall of cruelty. And Geneva held his hand through every one of them and never once told him to stay strong. Things got worse before they got better, as true things tend to. Lincoln's younger brother, Porter Monroe, had been circling the house for weeks, and Geneva had read him inside of one visit. Porter smiled with his entire face and nothing whatsoever behind it. He called Sullivan Sport and Champ and talked over him in the third person while standing in the man's own bedroom. He held a seat on the board of the family company, and Geneva, who'd spent a lifetime being underestimated by men in good suits, knew the smell of what he was after before he opened his mouth. She caught it through the study door she'd been told never to go near. Lincoln, I'm only saying this because I love that boy. But look at him. After all this time, 15 caregivers, And now what? A maid from Memphis. You cannot run this company and play night nurse to a vegetable. There are facilities, good ones. Come dignified places. We get him properly assessed. We get the conservatorship squared away. And you can finally grieve your son instead of standing guard over a body. The board's already nervous. A Monroe, who can't feed himself, sitting there named as, that's exposure we can't carry. Geneva's blood turned to ice. Water, conservatorship, assessed, facility. She'd stood inside those exact words years back in a different hallway about a different person. The morning a doctor she'd known for 9 minutes signed the paper that decided Laurel could no longer be trusted with her own life. She'd had no money in that hallway, no lawyer, no name on any building, and she had lost. The machine had swallowed her child whole, and Geneva had not been enough to stop it. She was not about to stand in a second hallway and lose a second. That doctor wrote your son off in 20 minutes, she said, on the worst morning of his month, without asking him one true thing about who he is. And your brother is going to walk that paper into your study with a conservatorship order and use it to lock Sullivan in a home and take this company right out from under you while you're too tired to lift your head. You already know it, and you're letting it roll downhill because burying him is easier than hoping for him. Lincoln rose, and the contract voice came back hard as a slammed drawer. You are a hired caregiver. You do not understand this family or what is at stake here. I understand it better than you do, Geneva said. She didn't raise her voice a notch. I lost a daughter to a man with a clipboard who decided in 9 minutes that she was already gone. I had no money and nobody in that building would listen to me, and they took her anyhow. So don't you stand there and lecture me about what I can't understand about watching somebody you love get erased by people who never bothered to ask them a single real question. Her voice held flat and even. The only difference between you and me, Mr. Monroe, is you've got every last thing a person needs to win this fight and you're spending it all on giving up. I had nothing in my hands that morning. I'd have given both my arms for what's sitting right there in yours. Lincoln rose and sat back down as though his own legs had quit on him too. What do you want me to do? It came out cracked. It wasn't the contract voice anymore. Go upstairs. Not to check the meal schedule. Not to ask the gray man how the day's been. Go sit in that chair beside his bed and talk to your son like he's a person who is coming back to you. Because he is. And he's been hiding it from you on purpose. And I'm about to tell you the reason. And it is going to break your heart clean in half, and you are going to deserve every piece of it. So, she told him about Scottsdale and the golf course card and the 2 words that Porter walked out of the family that same week, walked out by an older brother who had finally found something worth standing all the way up for. The board began asking pointed questions about precisely what Porter had been arranging behind closed doors, and those questions had teeth in them. Nobody took Porter Monroe apart with a speech. Sullivan took him apart by standing up. Lincoln Monroe paid off the $4,000 mortgage at a Memphis bank without breathing a word of it to Geneva. She only learned of it when the letter arrived with paid stamped right across the front and no name attached. When she tried to thank him, he wouldn't take it. You gave me my son back. His voice had learned how to go soft. Months too late. A house is a small thing next to that. It's not a small thing to me. No, Lincoln held her eyes. I'm only now learning what isn't small. You've been the one teaching me. Sullivan Monroe walks now with a cane on the bad days, and he'll likely keep it the rest of his life. And he doesn't mind, because a man who had to learn to walk a second time never again makes the mistake of thinking walking is nothing. He took over a piece of the company eventually, not because his father demanded it, but because he found he wanted it, which Lincoln came to understand was the only honest reason any person should take on anything. The first thing Sullivan did with Monroe money was fund a wing at the hospital over in Tennessee where Laurel was being kept, a polite kind of hospital that does a great deal better by its people the day somebody with a name on a building decides to care. He did it because of the woman who sat in the chair. He did it without anyone asking. Graham, Geneva's grandson, 18 and proud and peeling at the solace of his shoes, got himself a scholarship to study nursing, the very thing his grandmother had surrendered when she was barely more than a girl, the year her own mother told her she was finished as a person. Sullivan set the whole thing up. His reasoning, when his father asked, was that a family that could produce one Geneva Hughes ought to be able to afford to make another one. The first evening Graham came home in nursing scrubs. Geneva didn't cry until the moment he turned from the sink and told her, "I pulled a chair up beside my first patient today, Granny. Old man, stroke. He didn't know I was there, but I sat anyhow." Geneva put her hand to her mouth and cried for everyone she had ever sat beside and for the line of her family that had finally, after 3 generations, learned to do the same thing for somebody else. Geneva still works. She tell you straight that she always will, because sitting with the people the world has finished with is the one thing she was ever truly good at. And it turns out that was never a small job either. But she goes home now to a house that's paid for and a grandson who's going to be somebody. And on Sunday, she drives the long road to Tennessee and pulls a chair up beside a daughter who doesn't always know her face anymore. And she holds Laurel's hand the entire visit. And she does not tell her child to stay strong. People ask her sometimes about the Monroe boy, the miracle, they like to call it. The poor caregiver who walked into a wealthy family's mansion and got a paralyzed young man up off his deathbed when 15 trained professionals had given up and gone. Geneva has never cared for that version of the story. "I didn't get him up off anything. That's all she grant you. At first he got himself up. All I did was pull a chair over so the boy wasn't alone when he finally did it." Then she goes, still the real kind of still. And if you wait her out, patient as she once waited out a dying stranger, she hands you the part she actually needs. That young man is convinced I saved his life. But I was the one drowning the morning I took that job. I didn't have a daughter I can't reach anymore. A whole lifetime of being the woman nobody ever thinks to thank. He gave me back my life. She look at you then dead even, no flinch in it. So, you go on and tell me, after every bit of it, who exactly saved who. She never answers her own question. She leaves it sitting there in the open like a door propped wide on purpose, in case somebody who's been needing to walk through it for a long time finally can. 15 people walked out of that house before Geneva walked in. Nobody remembers their names. Not Sullivan, not Lincoln, not the man in the gray suit who counted their days. 15 trained professionals looked at a room with a boy in it and a chair beside the bed, and every one of them decided the chair was not their job. The 16th sat down. That is the whole story. Strip away the mansion and the money and the brother with the briefcase, and what's left is a chair that 15 people refused and one tired woman pulled close. Everything that happened after the standing, the walking, the wing in Tennessee, the boy in scrubs who learned to sit with strangers, all of it grew out of one woman deciding that a person nobody else would sit with was worth sitting with anyway. You have a chair like that. Everybody does. Somewhere in your life there's a person the world has quietly agreed to stop showing up for. Too far gone, too difficult, too much. And there's a seat next to them that stays empty because sitting in it costs something and pays nothing back. Geneva would tell you the secret she learned at 100 bedsides. If you asked her, it isn't that staying saves them. Half the time it doesn't. Laurel still doesn't always know her mother's face. Some chairs you sit in for years and the person never comes back. You sit anyway, because the sitting was never about whether they'd stand up. It was about whether they'd be alone when they tried. So before you click away, think of the chair you've been walking past, the call you keep meaning to make, the person everyone agreed to give up on. Tell me in the comments who's sitting in your empty chair right now, and what's stopping you from pulling it close. I read every one of them, and if this story moved you, stay close. The next one's already waiting, because somewhere out there tonight, in a room nobody wants to enter, there's a chair beside a bed. It's empty. Be the 16th.